September 4th, 1995 was a day that changed television history forever. No, I'm not talking about the debut of Xena Warrior Princess, although thank you Lucy Lawless for speeding up a young Pachiti's puberty by a couple of wonderful years. I am, of course, talking about the first episode of WCW Monday Nitro, which, if you say it quickly enough, sounds a little bit like Monday Night Raw, doesn't it? Oh, they were pushing it all right. Nitro was the idea of Eric Bischoff, who, when asked by Ted Turner what he needed in order to make the company competitive, blurted out that he could use a primetime show on one of his networks on Monday night, directly across from Raw, which had been on the air for just shy of 3 years by this point. Bischoff got his wish and WCW were off to the races, presenting the first Nitro from the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And WCW were not messing around as they tried to give the best first impression possible, presenting some pay-per-view main event level matches for free, debuting some major surprises, and laying the foundation for what would quickly become appointment television. But who were the players involved, what did they do on the show, and just where in the hell are they now? Let's find out. Mason Ryan, Stevie Ray, Earthquake, Alundra Blaze, Norman Smiley, Zach Gowen, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ahmed Johnson, Torrey Wilson, Buff, Bagwell, Robert Gibson, Dave Taylor, Terry Taylor, and Godfather's Holmes. Dwayne Gill, Adam Bomb, Michael Hayes, Cor Von, S.A. Rios, Jim Manai, the manager from Kai and Tai, Jim Powers, Francine, Jack Swagger, Mean Gene, Fat Chick Thriller, Duke the Dumpster, Oklahoma Manta. What happened to that wrestler? Some were main eventing, which leaves me lamenting. What happened to that wrestler? Some since long forgotten, but their memories live on. Eric Bischoff. The brains behind the Nitro concept and the man brave enough to take on Vince McMahon in prime time, Eric Bischoff was also on hand to provide commentary for the first episode of the show. Eazy-E was at that point executive vice president of WCW and riding high with the blessing and seemingly endless cash of Ted Turner. Bischoff's time in WCW came to an end as the company began spiraling out of control, and he eventually showed up as an on-screen personality in WWE and TNA, then returned to WWE again in June of 2019 for a short-lived spell as the executive director of SmackDown. These days, the Bish can be found on the 83 Weeks podcast, spinning yarns and shedding light on his life in wrestling. The name of the show is inspired by how many consecutive weeks Nitro beat Raw in the ratings during the Monday Night Wars. Steve McMichael. Accompanying Bischoff on commentary and making his debut at this event was the hard-partying Steve Mongo McMichael. Mongo, a former NFL standout who played for the New England Patriots, Green Bay Packers, and a Super Bowl-winning Chicago Bears team, called the action accompanied by his tiny pet dog Pepe, who was, of course, wearing a little devil costume, because, you know, why not? Mongo went from the announce desk to becoming a regular in-ring performer and member of the Four Horsemen during his WCW career, and won the United States Championship once. After leaving WCW in early 1999, McMichael kept plenty busy, and though he's retired, he does manage Mongo McMichael's restaurant in Romeoville, Illinois, and hosts a Sunday morning radio show. Bobby Heenan. Rounding out the announce team was Bobby the Brain Heenan. One of the best ever in wrestling, whether as an announcer, a manager, or, well, anything, Heenan was here to cheer on the heels and make those incredible off-the-cuff remarks that were his forte. Heenan worked as a commentator for the company between 1994 and late 2000, when he was released because the company was moving in a different direction and favoured Scott Hudson and Mark Madden in the booth. And people wonder why this company went out of business. Post-WCW, Heenan made only sporadic appearances, including at WrestleMania X7 in 2001, and to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2004. The reason for his limited activity was due to ill health. Heenan had battled cancer and other ailments bravely since 2002, but sadly passed away on September 17, 2017 at the age of 72. Dave Penza. Handling ring announcing duties on the very first Nitro was Dave Penza, who was around for every single taping of Nitro and Thunder during his WCW career. After WCW, Penza floated in and out of the wrestling scene and worked for TNA between 2006 and 2010, disappeared from the business for a while, and then resurfaced in 2017. He has since returned to Impact Wrestling full-time as a ring announcer and commentator. Jushin Liger. Kicking off with a battle of two world-class cruiserweights was a smart move, and New Japan's Jushin Thunder Liger was flown in to ensure the broadcast started on the right foot. Though Liger's priorities were with New Japan, he did appear for WCW intermittently between 1991 and 1999, dazzling fans with his hybrid blend of styles. Liger's WCW time came to an end after Vince Russo booked him to lose the prestigious IWGP Junior Heavyweight title to Juventud Guerrera after being hit in the head with a tequila bottle. You can go ahead and add that to the long list of Vinny Ru's pro wrestling sins. Liger continued to wrestle internationally until January 5th, 2020, when he had his retirement match at the Wrestle Kingdom event at the Tokyo Dome, ending an amazing 35-year career. He is set to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Brian Pillman. Liger's opponent that night was Flying Brian Pillman. The two had previously had revolutionary encounters in the early 90s, the most famous of which was the opening match of Super Brawl 92. They certainly complemented one another and gave fans a glimpse as to what WCW's cruiserweight division had to offer. Pillman's career took a turn not too long after the first Nitro, as he developed his controversial loose cannon persona, blending work with shoot to the point where even his colleagues and friends couldn't tell where the line was. Pillman left WCW in early 1996 and ended up in WWE via ECW. However, Pillman's WWE stay was seriously hindered due to injuries he had suffered in a major car accident. In almost constant pain, the former Cincinnati Bengal began to abuse illicit substances and tragically passed away the morning he was due to wrestle at the Bad Blood pay-per-view at the age of just 35. His son, Brian Pillman Jr., is currently wrestling on the independent circuit. Sting. WCW's franchise player then showed up with a word of warning for his opponent later in the night, Ric Flair. One of WCW's biggest success stories, Sting stayed with the company right until the end, morphing from the neon-soaked California surfer to a shadowy black and white figure who watched from the rafters. After WCW, Sting became a mainstay for TNA before making the inevitable and greatly anticipated jump to WWE in 2014. It was in WWE, during a match with Seth Rollins at Night of Champions 2015, that the Icon's in-ring career came to an end when he suffered a serious neck injury. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016, where he formally announced his retirement. As of May 2020, he's no longer signed to WWE, and speculation remains about where he will end up next. Outside of wrestling, Sting is a devout Christian and is involved in several real estate ventures. Hulk Hogan. What you gonna chew, brother, when Hulk Hogan's pastamania runs wild on you? The Hulkster seemed to put more effort into promoting his new restaurant venture than he did when wrestling Big Bubba Rogers in the main event, but then everybody knows the real money is in low-quality, carbohydrate-stuffed fast food. Hogan's career is legendary and doesn't need recapping here, but he's certainly had an interesting few years with public scandals, firings, and even being removed from the WWE Hall of Fame. He has since been reinstated and is back in Vince McMahon's good graces, making sporadic appearances with WWE since July 2018. He's due to be inducted into the Hall of Fame for a second time as a member of the NWO, and outside of wrestling, Hogan is involved in many other projects, and when he's not busy suing people, can often be found hanging out at his memorabilia store, Hogan's Beach Shop in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Jimmy Hart. If Hulk Hogan's on the show, then you better believe that his manager, inside the ring and out, is not too far behind. Taking a quick break as head chef for Pastamania, the Mouth of the South accompanied Hogan for his match with Big Bubba. He stuck around WCW in various roles until the bitter end, and has been seen just about everywhere since, including TNA and back in WWE. Since Jimmy Hart's Hall of Fame bar and tiki deck restaurant closed down in 2019, he has continued to make appearances at fan conventions and for independent promotions. Lex Luger. Lex Luger famously showed just before the Ric Flair vs Sting match, shocking fans who had just seen him 8 days earlier getting involved in the main event of SummerSlam, not to mention one night earlier at a WWE house show. The first big defection in the Monday Night Wars, the total package's appearance here helped set the tone for much of what was to come in the following years. He stayed with WCW until its sale to WWE and then took to the independent scene. His post-WCW career was marred by legal and personal problems though, and a spinal stroke in 2007 left him weakened and confined to a wheelchair. Luger became a born-again Christian and wrote an autobiography about his life and career, and nowadays leads a simple life living with his mother in Buffalo, New York, and working with local schools and churches, as well as making occasional appearances at fan conventions. Ric Flair. Sting's opponent on the first Nitro, Flair also wrestled his longtime rival in the last ever Nitro main event. The Nature Boy was an ever-present on WCW television, despite repeated and futile attempts to oust him. After the company had folded, he showed up in WWE as on-screen co-owner, and before long he was back in the ring on a full-time basis. His WWE career lasted until WrestleMania 24 in 2008, and the less said about his TNA run, done purely because the alimony pony needed the dough, the better. The dirtiest player in the game is still out there and has an increased profile these days thanks to his connections to rap music, bringing him to the attention of people who have no doubt never seen a single one of his classic matches. He's still under contract to WWE and shows up every now and again, often in the corner of his daughter Charlotte. Arn Anderson. Fellow horseman Arn Anderson was on hand to get into a scrap with his drinking buddy at the end of the Flair vs Sting match. AA wrestled for another year, but by the end of 1996, injuries had caught up with him, and he formally retired in a memorable segment on Nitro in August of 1997. He clung on until the end of WCW, and then began working for WWE as a road agent, and made the occasional on-screen appearance when required. The Enforcer left WWE in early 2019, and has since signed a multi-year deal with All Elite Wrestling, where he's the head coach and the on-screen advisor of Cody Rhodes. Anderson, perhaps one of the last wrestlers to formally break kayfabe and talk about the backstage workings of the industry, also has a hit podcast called The Arn Show. Scott Norton. Scott Norton gatecrashed the show at the end of the Flair Sting match to rant and rave and get into a shoving match with Mongo and then Randy Savage. Norton, who was a much bigger star in Japan than he was in the States, left WCW in 1999 to focus on his career in Japan. He's been wrestling there and on the independent circuit ever since, and in 2019 he released his autobiography, Strong Style. Randy Savage. Not wrestling on the night, but there to provide a healthy dose of star power was Randy Savage. Macho Man famously left a non-wrestling role in WWE to go to WCW because he still believed he had plenty in the tank as far as his in-ring career was concerned. Savage proved his doubters wrong by wrestling well into his 40s before leaving WCW and, for all intents and purposes, the wrestling business in 2000. His post-WCW life saw him release a rap album and work a couple of shows for TNA before he got married and settled into his retirement, retreating from the public eye while dabbling in voiceover work. Savage never returned to WWE and sadly passed away on May 20th, 2011 at the age of 58. He was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2015. Sabu. You can be forgiven for seeing the video hyping Sabu's future WCW Nitro appearance and going, "Eh? Sabu was in WCW? When was that, you dirty, filthy liar?" The death-defying maniac, who was one of the most spectacular wrestlers of his time, had left ECW for WCW, but would soon be back in the land of Extreme as his time in the company only lasted a couple of months. Despite the unspeakable damage he has done to his body over the decades, Sabu is, rather incredibly, still wrestling today on the independent scene and recently wrestled for Impact. Michael Wallstreet. The impending arrival of the former IRS was also hyped up on the show. Mike Rotunda, here going by the name Michael Wallstreet, soon to be changed to VK Wallstreet as a shot at you-know-who, would wrestle for the group until the spring of 2000, typically in a lower card role while splitting his time between the States and Japan. After WCW, he continued working in Japan before retiring in 2004. After retiring, he worked as a road agent and producer for WWE, but was furloughed along with many other producers on April 15th, 2020 because of the coronavirus pandemic. His son Bray Wyatt still presently wrestles for the promotion. Big Bubba Rogers. Big Bubba Rogers, better known as the Big Bossman, left WCW in 1998 and turned up on WWE television with a newer, more attitudinal look. As Vince McMahon's on-screen bodyguard, Bossman was in a featured role and continued to stay relevant thanks to his exploits in the hardcore division and storylines like the one where he kidnapped and cooked Al Snow's dog Pepper before feeding it to the distraught head case. A different time. Bossman continued working for WWE until 2003 and sadly passed away from a heart attack on September the 22nd, 2004, aged just 41. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016. Gene Okerlund. And finally, we have Gene Okerlund, who signed with WCW in 1993 and would work for the company until January of 2001. Following that, Mean Gene would return to WWE to call the gimmick Battle Royal at WrestleMania X7 with Bobby Heenan. From there, he was with WWE for the rest of his life and did a lot of hosting for shows like Confidential and Madison Square Garden Classics, and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2006. One of the greatest of all time, he was 76 years old when he sadly passed away on January 2nd, 2019.